Unlock the secrets. This is the African Arcana.
Subscribe to reveal more mysteries within the African Arcana.
A military coup, a scrapped constitution, no elections in sight, and now an official nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize? If that sentence feels broken, it's not your fault. It was built to break you. His name is Ibrahim Traoré. Captain, revolutionary, problem. In 2022, at just 34 years old, he overthrew Burkina Faso's transitional government. No negotiation, no ballot. Just a broadcast, a uniform, and a promise. This country belongs to its people again. No one believed him. The West called it another episode in the endless loop of African instability. France went silent, then furious. The UN issued its signature disappointment. And the headlines? Predictable. Another strongman rises. Democracy derailed. The Sahel crisis deepens. Except the story didn't follow the usual script. In the months that followed, something strange happened. The violence began to drop. Local militias, once branded as terrorists, were folded into agricultural cooperatives. Over 2,000 schools were constructed or reopened. National debt payments were frozen permanently. Burkina Faso, once on financial life support, declared economic independence from France and the IMF. No one clapped, because no one was ready for this storyline. A soldier who didn't become a tyrant, but a technician, a builder. Not of ideology, but infrastructure. Of land redistribution programs. Of locally managed reforestation. Of rural healthcare centers and food pipelines that didn't rely on Western aid. And now, in 2025, the question no one wanted to ask is clawing into public view. What if the man the world feared most is actually fixing the thing no one else could? That's not a compliment, it's a complication. And if you're still using old maps to read this terrain, you're already lost. Welcome to the paradox of Traoré. Let's go deeper. Everyone expected the worst. History said this was how it always went. A coup leader seizes power, crushes dissent, enriches his circle, and blames everything on imperial ghosts. Burkina Faso had seen it before, so had the world. But Traoré didn't read the manual. Instead of purging rivals or building a palace, he started slashing government salaries, including his own. He shut down expensive contracts with Western consultants and diverted the funds into local farming programs. He didn't announce reforms from behind podiums. He walked into villages and asked farmers what they needed. And they told him. By mid-2023, 64% of Burkina Faso's farmland under foreign lease had been returned to local cooperatives. This wasn't just land reform, it was land reclamation. Crops came back. So did displaced families. And in a part of the world where food security is usually a hollow phrase in white papers, maize and millet became currency again. Meanwhile, jihadist attacks fell by nearly 45%, according to Sahel security trackers, not because of foreign airstrikes, but because the fighters were being brought home. Reintegration programs offered former militants something they'd never had: land, work, and dignity. Still, there were no parades, no global summits in his honor, just silence. Because if what he was doing actually worked, then every consultant, diplomat, and development czar who failed before him had to answer for something. That's when the discomfort began. It wasn't that Traoré broke the rules, it's that he did, and the machine didn't collapse. So what now? Do you dismiss it because it doesn't fit your model, or do you update the model? Let's find out. Peace usually arrives with paperwork, agreements, ceasefires, monitored zones. It moves slowly, dragged through negotiation tables and photo ops, stamped and applauded by people in suits. But in Burkina Faso, peace showed up with calloused hands, repurposed guns, and no press release. By late 2024, entire regions once considered ungovernable had started functioning again. Not because foreign militaries pushed out extremists, but because local fighters laid down arms and picked up irrigation tools. They weren't pardoned, they were recruited into building what they once helped burn. The Farmers of Peace program, initially mocked as naive, now spans over 1,100 former combatants. They don't wear uniforms. They wear work clothes, eat what they grow, and live on land that until recently belonged to absentee foreign companies. Satellite data from late 2024 showed a 62% increase in cultivated land across Boucle du Muhun and Est regions. This wasn't theoretical success, you could see it from space. Meanwhile, a reforestation campaign dubbed Roots of Resistance began to reverse desertification in the Sahel. Over 200 million trees planted with zero outside funding, no CSR campaigns, no carbon credits, just a military-led civilian effort. Scientists in Nairobi and Bamako started referring to it as the first truly sovereign green project in West Africa. And still no headlines. Because this wasn't the story anyone prepared for. A junta that plants trees, reinvents agriculture, integrates militants through farming instead of prison. It didn't make narrative sense. And when stories don't make sense, they don't spread. But numbers don't care about narrative. And the numbers kept growing. 2,400 schools either built or reopened, 700 new health clinics, over 12,000 internally displaced people resettled not in camps but in rebuilt villages. Burkina Faso's literacy rates began to rise for the first time in a decade. The UN quietly moved the country off its high instability list in Q1 2025. Quietly, of course. No press release there either, so what do you do with that? What do you do when the metrics scream progress, but the model says problem? You either deny it or you dig deeper, and if you're still here, you're not the denial type. So let's push further into how the world actually responded, not with celebration, but with suspicion. Because when peace arrives from the wrong direction, some people get nervous. Success makes people nervous, especially when it wasn't licensed. By early 2025, Burkina Faso wasn't just surviving. It was outperforming expectations, outpacing neighbors, and worst of all, doing it without Western permission. That's when the diplomacy got weird. France, the former colonial power, was first to flinch. It had been militarily ejected by Traoré's regime in 2023. Humiliating enough. But now, with terror attacks down and public services up, Paris had no language left to critique him. So they defaulted to vague caution. President Anne-Luc Moreau called Burkina Faso's situation unsustainable in the long term without saying why. She later added, "We must not confuse short-term stability with long-term democracy." Translation? We hope this collapses before we have to admit it's working. The United States took a safer route. Silence. Secretary of State Janet Collins issued a single lukewarm statement recognizing improvements in local governance, quickly followed by a call for institutional checks and electoral clarity. A diplomatic shrug. They saw the numbers, they just didn't want to say them out loud. Meanwhile, the Vatican did what no one expected. It broke rank. Pope Leo XIV, during a speech in mid-2025, said, "Peace doesn't always wear the robes of tradition. Sometimes it wears dust and boots." The Holy See formally endorsed Traoré for the Nobel Peace Prize weeks later. It was unprecedented and deeply inconvenient. Because now the question wasn't just, is this working? It became, who gets to decide what peace even looks like? The African Union hesitated. ECOWAS remained divided. Human rights NGOs, long used to condemning juntas on reflex, struggled to frame Traoré. Some praised his anti-colonial stance but warned about democratic erosion. Others fixated on the lack of elections, ignoring the rising literacy, reforestation, and reintegration statistics. It was a diplomatic paralysis. No one wanted to endorse him, but no one could explain why they shouldn't. And while the talking points stalled, the streets of Ouagadougou didn't. In July 2025, tens of thousands gathered in a spontaneous rally, no flags, no stage, just a sea of hand-painted signs. One read, "We did not vote for him." He built anyway. Another said, "If democracy is food, give us results, not recipes." That's what scared world leaders most. Not that Traoré was breaking rules, but that he might be redefining which ones actually matter. And if you think this discomfort stayed in press rooms and embassies, wait until you see how it rattled America itself, because the mirror was coming. And it wasn't going to be flattering. Burkina Faso wasn't supposed to be a mirror. But by mid-2025, that's exactly what it became, and the reflection wasn't kind. Because here was a country once labelled a failed state, now showing signs of social repair that the world's most powerful democracy couldn't replicate at home. The juxtaposition was brutal. While Traoré's government rolled out 2,000 new schools in 2 years, public school closures were accelerating in Chicago and Philadelphia. While rural health centers opened in Burkina Faso's most volatile provinces, American hospitals in poor zip codes were shutting down maternity wards. While militants were being reabsorbed into farming brigades, US veterans were still dying homeless on the streets of LA. And maybe worst of all, people in Burkina Faso believed things were getting better. Gallup's 2025 Global Optimism Index showed a 58% spike in national hopefulness among Burkinabe youth. In the US, the same age group showed record low trust in institutions. Less than 9% believed the government would ever prioritize their future. That isn't just a stat, it's an indictment. So what do you do when a country without your money, your tech, your freedom brand, starts outperforming you in the very things you built your identity on? You shift the narrative. US think tanks started releasing white papers warning about authoritarian success models. Op-eds cautioned that not all growth is progress. Congressional hearings referred to Traoré's government as a temporary anomaly. On paper, it was just bureaucracy. But beneath it, you could hear the strain of a system unsure what to defend anymore. Because if a man with no election, no Wall Street ties, no Ivy League degree, can deliver more than trillion-dollar democracies, what does that say about the blueprint? Is it broken? Or was it never built to work in the first place? Some Americans began asking out loud. Others got angry. Social media split wide open, half claiming Traoré was a future strongman in disguise, the other half pointing to potholes, medical debt, and mass shootings, asking, "And we're the alternative?" Traoré never responded directly. He didn't have to. Every tree planted, every school opened, every fighter reformed. Each one said, "This is what leadership looks like, whether you like the rapping or not." And deep down, America knew it. Next, we follow where this discomfort leads, the deeper cracks where ideals meet power and truth starts getting edited. For years, the international order sold one promise: follow the rules and you'll get the rewards. Democracy, development, dignity. Just play nice. Open markets, sign the deals. Hold elections. Smile for the cameras. Burkina Faso didn't follow that path. It broke formation. And now, it's delivering outcomes the system couldn't. That makes people uncomfortable, not because Traoré is perfect, but because his imperfection is working. It's one thing to critique a dictator. It's another to watch that same dictator deliver free meals to every rural child while your democratic allies' kids are rationing lunch. It's easy to condemn strongmen when their streets are empty and their prisons are full. But what if the streets are busy and the clinics open? What if the outcomes don't match the label? That's where the logic starts to break. Because the international order, designed, maintained, and policed by former empires, has always been more obsessed with process than impact. It's safer that way. If you can blame someone for breaking rules, you don't have to explain why the rule followers are failing. But when someone breaks the rules and wins, now you have a problem. That's what Traoré has become, a walking contradiction, a soldier who built instead of bombed, a coup that produced clinics instead of chaos, a government with no elections but measurable education gains, and that's not supposed to be possible. So, what happens next? Do we update the theory or do we double down on the illusion? Because here's what's on the table now. If results matter more than rituals, then the whole model of global governance gets shaky. If people are healthier, safer, more fed, and more hopeful under a system we've condemned, then maybe we've been measuring success like accountants, not humans. And if we're honest, maybe that's why Traoré scares people, not because he's worse, but because he might be better than the story allowed. So ask yourself, when the numbers say yes and the model says no, which one do you trust? Don't answer too fast. You're not choosing sides. You're choosing definitions. Every miracle casts a shadow, especially the ones you want to believe in. Because while the numbers shine, the structure underneath them is still opaque. And the deeper you look into Traoré's Burkina Faso, the more you see the risks quiet but present. Start with this. No elections, none planned, none even hinted at. When international reporters asked about a timeline, government spokespeople gave evasive answers. Right now, the priority is stability. That sounds familiar, too familiar. The kind of language that lingers for years, decades. Then there's the consolidation of power. Traoré isn't just head of state. He controls the armed forces, internal security, strategic economic councils. Every major decision flows through his inner circle, an inner circle selected, not elected, and dissent? Still legal on paper, but real opposition voices are vanishing. Some self-censor, others disappear from the public sphere. A few outspoken journalists have left the country entirely, not jailed, not beaten, just slowly frozen out. It's not brutality, it's silence. And that silence is just as chilling. One human rights monitor, under anonymity, said in a 2025 field report, "What Traoré has built is working for now, but there are no brakes. If he ever turns, there's nothing to stop him." And that's the danger, because strongmen don't always start bad, they start effective, efficient, popular. That's what makes them dangerous, not their failure, but their success. Especially when the success comes without checks. We've seen this arc before. In Venezuela, in Ethiopia, in Turkey, reformers who became rulers, rulers who became regimes, and Traoré. Right now, he's walking a tightrope between savior and sovereign. The people still cheer, the schools are still opening, the fields still growing. But beneath it all sits a system with no scaffolding, no structure to protect the people if the hand on the lever ever loses its grip or tightens it too much. So here's the real question. Is Burkina Faso building a new model, or is it just building a smarter version of the old trap? You don't have to decide now. But if you're watching this and thinking, maybe it's different this time, just remember. So did they, every time. And history has receipts. For decades, the rules were clear. Peace meant stability. Democracy meant elections. Legitimacy meant alignment with Western frameworks. Simple, elegant, exportable, until they weren't. Because here's the uncomfortable reality. Burkina Faso, under Traoré, has violated every one of those definitions, and yet produced results the rule-abiding nations couldn't. So what now? Do we redefine peace as something you measure in treaties, or in whether kids can walk to school without gunfire? Do we define democracy as something you do every 4 years, or something you feel every day when your government shows up, builds, listens? Because if it's the second one, Traoré's regime starts to make a lot more sense. And the established democracies begin to look like they've been playing dress-up for decades, performing rituals while systems rot underneath. Let's look closer. Voter turnout in Burkina Faso, non-existent, by force. Voter turnout in the US 2024 presidential election, just under 58%. In key swing states, barely 50%. Half the country didn't believe the system could help them. That's not apathy. That's abandonment. So who's really undemocratic? In the UK, 2 prime ministers resigned in 1 year. In France, cities were burning over pension reform. In Germany, trust in parliament hit a post-reunification low. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, where no election posters exist, public trust in government operations rose by 37% between 2023 and 2025, according to regional polls. That shouldn't happen. But it did. And it's forcing a deeper reckoning. Maybe democracy isn't dying. Maybe it's mutating. Maybe peace was never about ceasefires and summits, but about impact, plain and lived. And maybe legitimacy has never truly belonged to systems, but to outcomes. If that's true, Traoré didn't just build a better state. He revealed how fragile the old ones are. That's why people are uncomfortable. Because he didn't overthrow just a government. He overthrew an idea. So here's the question you have to face now, not as a viewer, but as someone living in a system too. If your democracy can't feed you, protect you, or listen to you, is it still democracy? Think carefully. Your answer might say more about your country than his ever could. And if that's too much to admit, don't worry. History won't wait for you to get comfortable. Every revolution begins with light, but not all of them end that way. And if there's one thing history guarantees, it's that the most dangerous leaders are rarely the ones who start badly. It's the ones who start too well. The ones who win trust fast, who deliver results, who get too good, too fast for anyone to question them. That's the risk Traoré now represents, not because he's corrupted, but because no one's sure who could stop him if he ever island. There are no elections scheduled, no political opposition with teeth, no roadmap for transition. The state structure is efficient but fragile. 1 man, 10 ministries, a handful of trusted advisors, all loyalty, no friction. And when things run this smooth, people stop asking questions. Even good people, even smart people. And that silence, that's not peace, that's pressure waiting. Because today, the clinics are open, the farms are green, the security is holding. But what happens when the rains fail? When inflation spikes? When a scandal hits? What happens when hope starts slipping? Who speaks then? Who checks the unchecked? The warning signs are there, tucked under progress. Whistleblowers disappearing from local NGOs, journalists opting for self-censorship over exile, reforestation funds now controlled by military-linked cooperatives, former insurgent commanders suddenly appointed to provincial leadership without oversight, all small on their own, but patterns don't wait for permission. And if you think this is fear-mongering, ask Venezuela, ask Ethiopia, ask every citizen who once said, "He's different." They didn't fall overnight, they drifted, slowly, quietly, through loyalty, through love, through results. Then one day, there were no exits left, and that's the paradox. The better Traoré performs, the harder it becomes to imagine what happens after him, or without him, or against him. So ask yourself, can a revolution still be dangerous, even when it's working? That's not a rhetorical question. It's the one history asks right before things turn. Ibrahim Traoré didn't ask for your approval. He didn't check in with Paris or Washington or Geneva. He took power. He broke protocol. And then he started building. Clinics, schools, food pipelines, reintegration centers, forests, trust, not promises. Results. And that's exactly what makes his story so dangerous. Because if this works, if Burkina Faso continues on this path, then the world has to admit that everything it's preached for 50 years might have been more theater than truth. That peace can arrive outside institutions, that democracy isn't sacred unless it delivers, that power, when wielded with purpose, doesn't always corrupt, it sometimes repairs. That's terrifying. Because it means control is fragile. And legitimacy can't be copy-pasted. But it also opens the door to a new kind of model. One where systems aren't worshipped, outcomes are. Where leaders aren't judged by credentials, but by what grows under their watch. Where sovereignty isn't a slogan, it's a tool to build, to feed, to protect. Without asking for a gold star from global monitors, you don't have to like Traoré, you don't have to trust him, but you do have to decide what you believe in now. Because if he's wrong and this collapses, it will confirm everything you were taught. But if he's right and this holds, then maybe the world isn't ready for the future it pretends to want. So look around you. Look at your country, your streets, your schools, your food, your trust. Are you living in the system that works or just the one that talks? No one can answer that for you. But someone like Traoré just forced you to ask.